I thought I just bought a cheap cabin, but now an Apache woman in the basement says she's my wife. John had always felt a pull toward a quieter life. City life exhausted him. The constant noise, the traffic, and the endless stress of work made him feel like he was always running in place. He had dreamed for years of having a small cabin somewhere remote, surrounded by nature, where he could breathe, relax, and escape the constant chaos. He wasn't rich, and he didn't have a lot of savings, but he was determined to find a place that felt like it could be his own little world. One late evening, while scrolling through online property listings, John stumbled across something that caught his eye. It was a small cabin tucked away in the mountains. The pictures were old, the wood looked weathered, and the paint had peeled off in places, yet there was something charming about it. The listing claimed it was cheap, far cheaper than any property he had seen before in the area. A part of him thought it might be too good to be true. How could a cabin in such a beautiful location cost so little? But another part of him felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was the chance he had been waiting for. After a few nights of thinking and checking his finances, John decided to take the risk. He contacted the seller, arranged a quick visit, and by the end of the week, he had signed the papers. He couldn't believe it. He was the proud owner of a small mountain cabin, a place that he could finally call his own. He imagined mornings with the sun shining through the windows, evenings sitting by a small fire, and nights spent looking up at the stars without the distraction of city lights. The drive to the cabin was long, winding through narrow mountain roads lined with towering pine trees. The higher he went, the quieter it became. No honking cars, no sirens, no shouting, just the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional call of a bird. John felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness as he approached the cabin. He didn't know what to expect. The photos had looked okay, but sometimes pictures could be misleading. When he finally arrived, the cabin appeared even smaller than he had imagined. It sat quietly among the trees, almost hidden from view. The roof had a few missing shingles, and the porch creaked when he stepped on it, but John felt a strange sense of pride. He pushed open the door, which groaned loudly on its hinges, and stepped inside. The interior smelled of old wood and dust. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and a thin layer of dirt covered the floor. The furniture that remained was broken and worn, yet despite all of this, John could see potential. With a little work, this could be his dream home. As he explored the cabin, he found a small kitchen with a rusty stove, a tiny living room with a stone fireplace, and a bedroom that had a window looking out over the mountains. Each room seemed to tell a story of its past, and John wondered who had lived here before. He imagined families sitting by the fireplace, children running through the halls, and couples cooking together in the small kitchen. He felt connected to this place in a way he had never felt before. But as he walked around, John noticed something strange. In the corner of the living room, there was a small trapdoor that led to the basement. It was old and dusty, and the handle was cold to the touch. He didn't immediately open it. Something about it made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the darkness that seemed to swallow the small staircase, or maybe it was just the unknown. Still, he couldn't help feeling curious. What could be down there? He decided to leave it for later, thinking he would explore it the next day. That first night in the cabin was unlike anything John had experienced before. Without city lights and noise, the darkness felt complete. The wind howled through the trees outside, and the old wooden floor creaked with every movement. He lit a small lantern and sat by the fireplace, imagining how he would fix the place up. He could see himself painting the walls, cleaning the floors, and slowly turning the dusty cabin into a warm and welcoming home. As he drifted off to sleep, John couldn't shake a feeling that he wasn't entirely alone. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a strange awareness that something in the cabin was watching him. The shadows seemed deeper, and every little sound, like a branch tapping against the window or the floorboards settling, felt amplified. He told himself it was just his imagination, that old cabins made noises, and that he was letting his mind play tricks on him. Still, he couldn't completely ignore the feeling. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, and the cabin looked different in the bright light. The dust sparkled, and the wood, though worn, had a warm, golden tone. John went outside, taking in the view. Rolling mountains stretched as far as he could see, covered in pine trees that swayed gently in the morning breeze. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp mountain air. For the first time in years, he felt truly relaxed. After breakfast, John decided it was time to explore the basement. He grabbed a flashlight, his curiosity outweighing any lingering unease. The trapdoor creaked as he opened it, and a musty smell hit him. The stairs were narrow and steep, leading down into near-complete darkness. He switched on his flashlight and began to descend slowly, stepping carefully on the uneven wooden steps. When he reached the bottom, the basement revealed itself as a small, stone-walled room. There was very little furniture, just a few old boxes stacked in the corners and a workbench covered in dust. It seemed empty, almost forgotten. John felt a strange sense of calm, mixed with a flicker of unease. He walked around, shining the light into every corner, wondering what secrets this place might hold. As he explored, his flashlight beam caught something unexpected. A shadow moved across the far corner of the basement. John froze, heart pounding. He quickly reminded himself that it was probably just a trick of the light, or perhaps a small animal hiding in the corner. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized that it wasn't a shadow at all. Sitting quietly against the wall was a woman. She looked at him calmly, almost as if she had been waiting. John blinked, unsure if he was seeing correctly. She was young, with long, dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold a story he couldn't yet understand. Her clothes were simple and worn, and she had a calm, almost serene presence. Before he could speak, she looked at him and said in a soft, clear voice, You're my husband." John froze. His mind raced. What was she talking about? Was this some kind of prank? How could she say that? He didn't even know her. And yet something in her voice, the certainty, the calmness, made him hesitate. He wanted to speak, to ask her who she was and why she was here, but no words came out. The basement felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. He stepped back, unsure what to do. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, that he needed to leave and call someone. Yet another part of him, a part he didn't fully understand, wanted to sit down and listen. He felt drawn to her, curious about the story behind those words. Who was she? How did she know him? And what did she mean by husband? For the rest of the day, John stayed near the basement, talking carefully with the woman. She introduced herself as Kaya and explained in simple words that she had been living in the cabin for a long time. Her story was confusing at first, filled with words about ancient traditions, promises, and connections that didn't make sense to him. Yet as she spoke, John couldn't help but feel that there was truth in her eyes. He didn't understand it yet, but he sensed that the cabin and this mysterious woman were connected to something much bigger than he had imagined. By the end of the day, John felt exhausted but strangely alive. His quiet dream of living in a cabin had turned into something completely unexpected. He realized that this place was not just a cabin, it was the beginning of a story he could never have predicted. And somewhere deep down, he knew that meeting Kaya was just the start of an adventure that would change his life forever. John woke the next morning with a mixture of excitement and confusion. His mind was restless, thinking about Kaya and the strange words she had spoken the night before. "You're my husband," she had said so calmly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. John couldn't make sense of it, but he couldn't stop thinking about her either. He had expected the first night in his new cabin to be quiet and peaceful, but instead, it had been filled with mystery and questions he had no answers to. He ate a quick breakfast, trying to focus on simple tasks, making coffee, checking the small garden outside, and tidying up some of the dust inside the cabin. But every time he glanced toward the basement door, a flicker of curiosity and fear returned. He wondered what else might be hidden down there, what secrets the cabin held, and why Kaya was living in it alone. He couldn't deny that she had a presence that was calm but strong, as if she belonged there in a way he didn't yet understand. After breakfast, John finally decided he needed to talk to her. He descended the basement stairs carefully, the wooden steps creaking under his weight. The basement smelled the same as before, musty and earthy, but this time it didn't feel empty. Kaya was there, sitting quietly on an old rug, as if she had been waiting for him. She didn't speak immediately, just looked up with her dark, calm eyes. "Good morning," John said, his voice uncertain. I didn't expect anyone to be here." Kaya smiled slightly. "I have always been here, you just did not see me until yesterday." John blinked. He didn't understand. "But how? I bought this cabin, no one told me anyone was living here." Kaya looked down at her hands for a moment. "The cabin chooses, it brings people together." "You are part of this place now, that is why you are here." John swallowed hard. He wanted to ask more, but the words felt strange on his tongue. She spoke with certainty, and even though her explanation made little sense to him, there was a calm confidence in her voice that made him pause. He felt drawn to listen, even though part of him wanted to run. Over the next few hours, John tried to understand Kaya. She told him stories about the mountains, the land, and the history of the cabin. She spoke of old traditions and of her people, the Apache, and how certain places were special, almost alive. She claimed that this cabin had a connection to her family, that long ago a promise had been made, a promise that somehow connected her to the future owner. John had never believed in destiny or signs before, but the way she spoke made him consider things he had never thought possible. At first, John tried to treat it rationally. Maybe Kaya had been living there for years, waiting for someone to arrive. Maybe she believed in some story she had heard as a child. He even considered that she might be lonely, or perhaps she had imagined their connection. He tried to dismiss the idea that the cabin could choose someone, or that he could be connected to her in any meaningful way. Yet the more he listened, the more the details made him pause. She seemed to know things about him that she shouldn't have known, small habits, little preferences, even things he had never told anyone. The next few days passed slowly but strangely. John tried to explore the cabin more thoroughly, cleaning, repairing, and organizing his new home. But Kaya was always nearby, quietly observing or helping. She never forced herself into his space, but her presence was constant, and he started feeling as if the cabin itself had accepted her as part of it. At night, when he sat by the fireplace, he found himself thinking about her more than anything else. Her calm voice, her soft smile, and the quiet way she moved through the room stayed with him. One evening, as the sun was setting behind the mountains, John and Kaya sat outside on the porch. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was crisp and cool. Kaya told him about the traditions of her people, how they respected the land, how they honored certain places, and how they believed that some connections were made by fate. John listened quietly, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just watching the mountains. He had never heard stories like these before, and though part of him was skeptical, another part of him felt a strange sense of wonder. As the days went on, John began noticing small things that made him question his own skepticism. Objects in the cabin seemed to move slightly, letters or notes appeared with no explanation, and sometimes he would hear faint sounds, footsteps, whispers, or soft rustling, when no one else was around. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but over time, the occurrences became too frequent to ignore. Kaya seemed to notice them too, but she never appeared frightened. She only said, "The cabin shows us things when we are ready." John tried to ask her what she meant, but Kaya would only smile and shake her head slightly. "You will understand in time," she said. One day, while John was organizing some old boxes in the basement, he found something surprising. Among the dust and cobwebs, there were old letters, photographs, and documents. Most were faded and difficult to read, but a few mentioned names and events that hinted at a long history connected to the cabin. One photograph showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Kaya standing beside the cabin decades ago. John's heart raced. How could this be? He showed the photo to Kaya, who looked at it with a faint smile. "That is my grandmother," she said quietly. "She lived here long ago. This cabin has always been part of our family." John felt a chill run down his spine. The coincidences, the strange experiences, and Kaya's presence all seemed to connect in ways he could not explain. He wanted to argue, to demand explanations, but he realized that the cabin itself seemed to resist his skepticism. Something larger than him was at play, something tied to the history of this place and the woman sitting quietly in the basement. Over time, John and Kaya began to develop a routine. During the day, John worked on repairing the cabin, while Kaya would tell him stories or help him with simple tasks. She had a way of moving quietly, always seeming to know what needed to be done. At night, they would sit by the fire or on the porch, watching the mountains and sharing thoughts about life, dreams, and the strange path that had brought them together. Though John still didn't fully understand the words she had spoken, the claim that he was her husband, he found himself drawn to her. He began to trust her in small ways, confiding in her about his fears, his dreams, and his past. Kaya listened patiently, never judging, always responding with calm wisdom. For the first time in his life, John felt a connection with another person that went beyond words or explanations. One afternoon, a strong storm rolled in from the mountains. Rain poured heavily, thunder boomed, and lightning lit up the sky. John was inside, fixing a leaky roof, when Kaya appeared at the door. She had been outside, securing the surrounding area, and she looked calm despite the storm. Together, they worked to protect the cabin, moving boxes, reinforcing windows, and checking that everything was safe. The experience, though exhausting, made John feel closer to her. He realized that they made a good team, that even in the chaos of the storm, they could rely on each other. By the end of the week, John's feelings for Kaya had grown stronger, though he still couldn't explain them. He still didn't fully believe her claim about being her husband, but he couldn't deny that she had become a part of his life. The cabin, once empty and quiet, now felt alive with stories, history, and the presence of someone who seemed to belong there as much as he did. One night, as he lay in bed listening to the wind, John reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. Just a few days ago, he had been alone, excited about a cheap cabin and a dream of solitude. Now he shared the space with a mysterious woman who spoke of history, destiny, and connections he didn't fully understand. He felt a mixture of fear, curiosity, and excitement. Something told him that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. And in the quiet moments when the storm had passed and the mountains were still, John realized that this cabin was not just a place to live. It was the beginning of a story full of mystery, history, and an unexpected connection that would shape the rest of his life. Days passed, and John could no longer ignore the strange feeling that had settled over the cabin. It was as if the place itself was alive, quietly observing him, nudging him toward thoughts he didn't fully understand. Kaya's presence only strengthened the mystery. She moved around the cabin with ease, handling tasks that John didn't even notice needed doing, and she spoke with quiet confidence about things he had no knowledge of. Sometimes he caught her looking at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable but also strangely drawn to her. John tried to go about his normal routine, fixing the cabin, chopping wood, and exploring the land around him. Yet no matter what he did, his mind kept drifting back to Kaya's words, the claim that he was her husband. He wanted to dismiss it, to tell himself it was nonsense, but the way she spoke made it hard to ignore. She never demanded that he believe her. She only stated it calmly, as though it were a simple fact. That calm certainty unsettled him, because he had never met anyone who could speak with such absolute conviction. One morning, while he was clearing some debris from the cabin's porch, John noticed something unusual. Small objects around the cabin seemed to have moved. A lantern he had left by the door was now leaning against the wall, and a few tools he had set on a bench were neatly arranged. At first, he thought he must have forgotten where he had placed them, but as he looked around, he realized the changes were too precise to be random. His heart raced. Was Kaya doing this, or was it something else? He went down to the basement, flashlight in hand, determined to confront the mystery. Kaya was there, sitting quietly as always, her eyes following him. "You moved things?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Kaya shook her head. "No, the cabin moves things when it senses need. You are noticing it because you are beginning to see." John frowned, frustrated. "See what? What is the cabin trying to tell me?" Kaya smiled faintly. "You will understand in time, but you must be patient. The cabin reveals its secrets slowly to those who are ready." John felt a chill. Patience was not his strongest trait, and yet he couldn't deny that something powerful was at play here. He left the basement, feeling a mixture of curiosity and unease. Over the next few days, more small occurrences happened. Sometimes he would hear faint whispers when no one was speaking. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night to find the cabin unusually cold or warm, as if it were breathing. Each time, Kaya seemed unaffected, calm as ever, reinforcing the sense that she understood things he could not. One afternoon, John decided to explore the land surrounding the cabin. The mountains stretched endlessly, covered in thick forests and dotted with small clearings. As he walked, he found an old stone circle hidden in the trees, moss-covered and almost invisible unless one looked closely. He felt a strange pull toward it, a sensation of being watched or perhaps welcomed. He called Kaya, and she came quickly, her face calm but knowing. "This is a sacred place," she explained softly. "Long ago my people honored this land. It is connected to the cabin, to those who live here, and to those who are chosen." John's mind raced. Chosen for what? He asked her questions, but her answers were always calm, always patient, never giving the full explanation. He wanted certainty, clarity, and yet he began to feel that perhaps this was a lesson in trust, in believing things beyond logic. As the days turned into a week, John noticed changes in himself. He no longer felt like a visitor in the cabin. He felt like a part of it. He trusted Kaya in ways he had never trusted anyone, even though he didn't fully understand her story. Her knowledge of the cabin, the land, and its history fascinated him, and slowly he began to believe that perhaps there was truth in her words. One evening, as the sun set and painted the mountains in orange and purple, John and Kaya sat outside by a small fire. The air was cool, and the silence of the mountains was complete, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Kaya spoke of the past, telling him stories about her ancestors, their traditions, and the importance of keeping promises made long ago. "You see, John," she said, "the cabin is not just a home, it is a keeper of stories, a guardian of promises. My family has waited a long time for someone to arrive. You are that person." John listened, his mind a storm of questions and disbelief. "But I don't understand. How could I be part of this? I've never known anything about your family, your traditions, or this cabin." Kaya's eyes softened. "The land chooses, the cabin chooses, it waits for the right person to come. You were meant to be here even if you did not know it." John wanted to argue, to demand proof, but something about her calm certainty made him pause. He realized that the words themselves were less important than the feeling they carried, the feeling that he had stumbled into something far greater than himself. The following morning, John found an old chest in the attic, hidden beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. Inside, there were letters, documents, and photographs, some so old they were almost fragile. One photograph in particular caught his attention. It showed a woman who looked remarkably like Kaya, standing beside the cabin many decades ago. Her clothes were different, her hair styled in the fashion of another era, but the resemblance was undeniable. He showed it to Kaya, who looked at the photograph with a quiet reverence. "That is my grandmother," she said softly. "She lived here. She knew the cabin would bring someone to us, someone chosen." John felt a shiver run through him. The coincidences were too strong, the timing too precise for this to be mere chance. Something about this place and about Kaya made him question everything he had believed about life, fate, and destiny. As the days passed, John began to accept that the cabin and Kaya were connected in ways he could not fully explain. He started paying attention to the subtle signs, the way the cabin seemed to guide him, the way Kaya understood things without words, and the way the land itself seemed alive. He could no longer see his new home as just a simple cabin. It was a place of mystery, history, and perhaps even magic. One night, a strong wind blew through the mountains, rattling windows and shaking doors. John and Kaya were inside, tending the fireplace. The cabin seemed to respond to the storm, creaking and groaning as though alive. John felt a strange sense of awe and fear. He realized that this place was not just a shelter. It was a living part of something much larger than himself. "You see," Kaya said quietly, "the cabin protects, it teaches, and it guides, but it also tests. You must learn to listen, to observe, and to trust." John nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He felt a sense of humility, recognizing that his life had taken a turn he could never have imagined. The cheap cabin he had bought on a whim had become a center of mystery, history, and connection. And in the middle of it all was Kaya, calm, wise, and patient, waiting for him to understand what it all meant. In the days that followed, John continued to explore, clean, and repair the cabin, but he also spent time learning from Kaya. She taught him about the traditions of her people, the importance of respect for the land, and the ways the past and present could connect. Slowly, he began to see the truth in her words, not just in the stories she told, but in the experiences they shared and the signs he could no longer deny. By the end of the week, John felt a subtle but profound change in himself. He was no longer just a man seeking peace. He was part of something larger. The cabin had chosen him, and Kaya had become a central part of his life. While he still had many questions, he understood that some answers could only come with time, patience, and observation. And for the first time in years, John felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The next few weeks were unlike anything John had ever experienced. The cabin, which had once felt like a quiet retreat, had now become a place full of mysteries and lessons. Every day brought something new, a strange sound, a subtle movement, or a detail he hadn't noticed before. The cabin seemed alive, guiding him, testing him, and teaching him things he could not yet understand. And through it all, Kaya remained by his side, calm and patient, as though she had always known what would happen. John had started waking earlier than usual, drawn by the soft light of dawn and the stillness of the mountains. He would step outside, breathing in the crisp morning air and feel the peace of the wilderness around him. The trees swayed gently, the birds sang softly, and the wind whispered through the valleys. Yet even in this quiet, he felt a strange presence, something almost invisible but undeniably powerful. He began to understand Kaya's words about the cabin guiding those who were ready. During the day, he worked tirelessly to repair the cabin. The roof needed fixing, the floorboards had to be replaced, and the walls were cracked and peeling. Kaya helped when she could, though she also spent her time showing John small details he would have otherwise missed. She pointed out hidden cracks that let in cold air, places where water collected after rain, and even small marks on the walls that told a story of the cabin's past. John was amazed by her knowledge. It seemed as if she had known this cabin for much longer than her own life, as though her family's history was tied to every beam and nail. One afternoon, while carrying a box of old tools to the basement, John stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind one of the walls. It was small and dusty, almost invisible unless one looked closely. Inside, he found a collection of journals, letters, and old documents, some written decades ago. The handwriting was careful, almost reverent, and the words spoke of promises, traditions, and connections that John could barely comprehend. Kaya knelt beside him, her fingers lightly brushing the papers. "These are the stories of my family," she said softly. "They lived here, cared for the cabin, and made promises that reached across time. You are now a part of that story." John felt a shiver run down his spine. The coincidences, the strange events, and Kaya's calm certainty all seemed to connect in ways he could not explain. He wanted to question everything, but he also felt a deep sense of trust. Perhaps some things were meant to be accepted before they were understood. As the days went on, John and Kaya began to explore the surrounding land more thoroughly. The mountains were vast, with hidden paths, small streams, and secret clearings that seemed untouched by time. Kaya explained that many of these places were sacred, tied to rituals and stories that had been passed down for generations. She told John about the importance of respect for the land and for the traditions that had been practiced there long before he arrived. One evening, while following a narrow path through the forest, John and Kaya came across a small clearing that seemed almost magical. Sunlight streamed through the trees, illuminating an old stone altar covered in moss and carvings. Kaya knelt beside it, touching the stones gently. "This is a place of connection," she said. "It is where promises are honored and where the past meets the present. The cabin brought you here for a reason. You are learning what it means to belong." John felt a mixture of awe and confusion. He had never believed in fate or destiny, yet standing there in the quiet mountains with Kaya by his side, he could not deny the feeling that something larger was at work. The forest was alive with whispers, the trees seemed to bend toward them, and the air carried a sense of history and power. Back at the cabin, John began noticing even more subtle signs. Sometimes, objects would appear in places where he needed them, as if the cabin itself anticipated his actions. Notes would appear, written in handwriting that was unfamiliar but comforting, offering guidance or encouragement. Shadows seemed to move with purpose, and occasional sounds, the creaking of wood, the rustling of leaves, felt like messages rather than random noise. Kaya explained that the cabin had a consciousness, a spirit that protected the land and guided those who were worthy. John wanted to ask questions, to understand how this could be possible, but Kaya's calm presence reminded him that some answers could only come with experience. He began to accept that there were mysteries in life that could not be explained by logic alone. One night, during a particularly intense storm, the cabin shook and groaned under the force of the wind and rain. John and Kaya worked together to secure the windows and reinforce the doors. The storm raged on for hours, and yet amidst the chaos, John felt a strange sense of calm. Kaya moved with confidence and precision, her actions instinctive and sure. He realized that he had grown to trust her completely, not just as a companion, but as a guide through a world he had never fully understood. As the storm passed, the mountains were quiet again, and the cabin seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. John sat by the fireplace, exhausted but content, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. He had come to the cabin seeking solitude, but instead he had found connection, history, and a sense of purpose he had never imagined. Kaya joined him, sitting quietly beside the fire. She looked at him with a gentle smile. "You are learning, John," she said softly. "The cabin tests, teaches, and guides. You are ready for what comes next." John nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and wonder. He still did not fully understand the cabin, Kaya, or the events that had led him here, but he realized that perhaps understanding was not the goal. Perhaps the journey itself, the learning, the experiences, the connections, was what mattered most. In the days that followed, John began to embrace the routines of the cabin fully. He repaired floors, cleaned windows, and organized the living space, but he also took time to learn from Kaya, observing her knowledge of the land and the cabin's history. He listened to her stories, watched her carefully perform small tasks, and began to understand the importance of patience, observation, and respect for the world around him. One afternoon, while exploring a hidden corner of the forest, John stumbled upon an old well, partially hidden by overgrown vines and roots. Kaya approached him quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This well holds memories," she explained. "It is a link to the past, a place where stories and promises are kept. The cabin brought you here to understand that everything has a purpose, even things that seem forgotten." John peered into the dark depths of the well, feeling a shiver run down his spine. He could not see the bottom, yet he sensed the weight of history within it. It was as if the cabin, the forest, and Kaya herself were teaching him that life was full of unseen forces, guiding him toward understanding, connection, and perhaps destiny. By the end of the week, John felt a profound change within himself. He no longer viewed the cabin as a simple retreat or a cheap property he had purchased on a whim. It had become a living, breathing part of his life, filled with history, mystery, and lessons that extended beyond logic or reason. Kaya, with her calm wisdom and deep connection to the land, had become more than a companion. She was a guide, a teacher, and perhaps even a key to understanding the strange path he had been brought onto. John realized that his life had shifted in ways he could never have imagined. The quiet mountains, the living cabin, and the mysterious woman who claimed him as her husband had created a world that was far richer, deeper, and more meaningful than he had ever known. He knew that the journey was far from over, but he felt ready to face whatever came next, guided by the wisdom of Kaya, the lessons of the cabin, and the silent, powerful presence of the land itself. And in those quiet moments, as the sun set over the mountains and the cabin glowed warmly in the evening light, John understood that his life had been forever changed, not by chance, but by a series of events, connections, and choices that had brought him exactly where he was. Meant to be, the days at the cabin began to feel heavier, yet in a way that pulled John deeper into the mystery he could not fully explain. The mountains were quiet, but their silence was not empty. The wind whispered through the trees with a voice he could almost understand. Even the animals seemed to act differently, as if aware of something extraordinary taking place. John had grown accustomed to Kaya's calm presence, but he could sense that the cabin, the land, and the woman together held secrets that were still hidden. One morning, John woke to a strange feeling of urgency. The air inside the cabin felt thicker, almost electric. He looked around the room and noticed small changes. Things slightly moved, faint marks on the wooden floor, and a sense that someone or something had been there while he slept. Kaya, sitting quietly by the window, noticed his unease. "The cabin speaks," she said softly. "It tests, it guides, it shows the path. Sometimes the messages are clear and sometimes they are subtle, but you are ready to understand more." John's heart raced. "What do you mean, ready? Ready for what?" Kaya didn't answer immediately. She only smiled faintly and gestured for him to follow her. Together, they went outside. The morning sun cast long shadows across the forest floor, illuminating the hidden paths that John had not noticed before. Kaya led him carefully, pointing out details in the land, the shape of the trees, markings in the soil, and tiny stones placed with intention. "Everything here has meaning," she said. "The cabin chose you, but the land chooses too. You must learn to listen and see." John tried to focus, but he felt overwhelmed. How could he understand a world that seemed invisible to everyone else? How could a simple cabin and a woman who had appeared mysteriously hold such power over his life? Yet, as he observed Kaya moving with purpose, pointing out details and speaking softly about the history of the land, he felt a strange sense of trust. She had lived here in ways he couldn't fully comprehend, yet he felt certain that she was telling the truth. Later that day, while exploring a hidden clearing deep in the forest, John noticed something that took his breath away. A small, sparkling stream cut through the greenery, and near it was a circle of ancient stones, partially hidden by moss and roots. Kaya knelt beside the stones, tracing patterns with her fingers. "This place holds memories," she explained. "The people who came before us honored it. It remembers promises, connections, and choices. You are part of that now." John knelt beside her, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she was saying. He had never believed in magic, destiny, or signs before, but standing there in the quiet forest with Kaya beside him, he began to understand that some things were real even if they could not be explained. The air felt alive, the earth beneath them solid yet vibrant, and the stones seemed to hum with energy. Over the next few days, John began noticing more signs that the cabin and the land were guiding him. Sometimes, objects he needed appeared in the right place at the right time. Notes would appear with words of encouragement or subtle instructions. Sounds and movements that once startled him now felt intentional, almost like the cabin itself was communicating. Kaya explained that the land and the cabin were alive with history and memory, and that only those who truly paid attention could understand. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains and painted the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, a new challenge appeared. A tree had fallen across the main path leading to the cabin, blocking access and making it impossible to leave. John tried to move it himself, but it was too heavy. Kaya joined him, and together they worked carefully, lifting and dragging small sections until a path opened. It was exhausting, but it reminded John that life in this remote place was not just peaceful solitude. It was demanding, requiring patience, effort, and cooperation. As they worked, Kaya spoke of lessons hidden in challenges. "The cabin tests," she said. "It tests our patience, our courage, and our understanding. It is easy to see a problem and react in fear. It is harder to see it and act with purpose and clarity. That is what you are learning." John nodded, exhausted but thoughtful. He realized she was right. The cabin, the land, and Kaya were teaching him something more than practical skills. They were teaching him about life, trust, and understanding forces larger than himself. That night, after the storm had passed, they sat by the fire inside the cabin. The wind had settled, and the mountains were quiet again. Kaya spoke softly about the past, telling John stories of her ancestors, their struggles, and their wisdom. She explained that the cabin had been part of her family's history for generations, and that it had always been a place of connection, learning, and guidance. "You see, John," she said, "the cabin brings people together. It brings those who are meant to be here. It teaches lessons that cannot be learned elsewhere. It shows what is important, and it reminds us that every action has meaning." John listened, absorbing every word. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and humility. The cabin had chosen him, but it was not a gift of ease or comfort. It was a gift of understanding, of connection, and of growth. He realized that the strange events, the hidden messages, and the subtle signs were all part of a larger plan, one that he was only beginning to understand. Over the following days, John began exploring the land more actively, guided by Kaya's knowledge. They discovered hidden paths, old stone markers, and small structures that had been part of the cabin's history. Each discovery brought a deeper sense of connection, as if they were uncovering the story of everyone who had come before them. John felt humbled, realizing that his life was now part of a story that extended beyond himself. One morning, as they walked along a narrow ridge, John noticed a small wooden box partially buried in the soil. He dug it out carefully and opened it to find a collection of old letters. The handwriting was delicate, filled with expressions of hope, love, and trust. Kaya read them quietly, her eyes reflecting both sadness and reverence. "These letters are part of the cabin's memory," she explained. "They were written by those who came before us, people who believed in the land, in promises, and in connections. You are now part of that chain, John. You are learning what it means to honor the past and live in the present." John felt overwhelmed. He had never thought that a simple decision to buy a cheap cabin could lead to this. A life filled with mystery, history, and lessons about trust, patience, and understanding. He realized that the cabin was not just a building. It was a teacher, a guide, and a keeper of stories. That night, as the sky darkened and the stars appeared, John and Kaya sat outside the cabin, listening to the quiet of the mountains. The wind rustled softly through the trees, and the fire flickered warmly beside them. John felt a deep sense of peace mixed with anticipation. He knew that the journey was far from over. There were still mysteries to uncover, lessons to learn, and connections to make. But for the first time, John felt ready. He had learned to trust Kaya, to observe the subtle signs of the cabin and the land, and to accept that some things could not be explained but only experienced. He understood that his life had changed, not by chance, but by a series of events, connections, and choices that had brought him exactly where he was meant to be. As he looked at Kaya, sitting quietly beside him, he realized that the bond between them had grown deeper than words could describe. She was no longer just a mysterious woman in the basement. She was his guide, his companion, and perhaps even a reflection of the lessons the cabin had been trying to teach all along. And as the night settled over the mountains, John felt a quiet certainty. He knew that the cabin, Kaya, and the land itself were part of a story far greater than himself, a story that had been unfolding long before he arrived, and one that would continue long after. He was ready to face whatever came next, guided by wisdom, connection, and the enduring presence of the mysterious cabin that had changed his life forever. The days that followed felt calm, yet charged with a quiet anticipation. John had grown used to the rhythms of the cabin, the forest, and Kaya's presence. Each morning, he would wake to the soft light of the mountains, the scent of pine in the air, and the gentle hum of life all around him. The cabin no longer felt like a simple structure made of wood and stone. It felt alive, a part of him, and a part of something far larger than his understanding. Kaya had become an inseparable part of his life. She moved gracefully through the cabin and the surrounding land, always aware of small details he would have missed. Sometimes she would remain silent, watching the world with her calm eyes, and John would sense that she understood things he could not. He had begun to trust her implicitly, and yet he still wondered about the mysterious claim she had made, that he was her husband. One afternoon, while exploring a narrow path through the forest, John noticed a small grove he had not seen before. The sunlight filtered through the trees, creating a golden glow over the moss-covered ground. Birds chirped softly, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Kaya gestured for him to sit on a fallen log beside her. "This place is special," she said quietly. "It is where the past, present, and future meet. The cabin brought you here for a reason. You have been learning, observing, and growing. Now you will understand more about the connection you share with me." John's heart raced. He wanted to ask questions, but he also felt that some things could not be rushed. He nodded and waited, letting her speak. Kaya began to tell the story of her family, the cabin, and the land. She spoke of generations who had lived here, respected the mountains, and followed traditions that honored the past while guiding the present. She explained that long ago a promise had been made, a promise that connected her family to the cabin and to the person who would one day inherit it. "You are that person," she said gently. "The cabin has chosen you. My family has waited for you just as the land has. That is why you are here, John. That is why we are together." John felt a mixture of awe, disbelief, and understanding. At first, it was hard to grasp how a simple cabin could hold such power over life and destiny. Yet looking into Kaya's calm eyes, he began to feel the truth of her words. Everything he had experienced, the subtle signs, the small movements, the hidden letters, and the forest paths, had been leading to this moment. That evening they returned to the cabin as the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool and clear. John felt a profound sense of peace. The cabin, once mysterious and slightly frightening, now felt like a home in every sense of the word. He realized that he had grown, learned patience, and discovered a deeper understanding of life, connection, and destiny. Over the next few days, John and Kaya worked together to restore the cabin completely. They repaired the roof, polished the floors, and cleaned every corner, making it warm and welcoming. But it was not just the physical repairs that mattered. It was the understanding and harmony they were building together. The cabin seemed to respond to their efforts, almost as if it were alive and approving of their care. One morning, while walking along the stream that ran behind the cabin, John noticed small flowers blooming that he hadn't seen before. Kaya smiled. The land thrives when it is respected, she said. When we act with purpose, the world around us responds. You are learning the language of the cabin, the land, and the life we share. John felt a sense of wonder. Everything around him, the mountains, the trees, the streams, and even the cabin itself, seemed to be alive, connected in ways he had never imagined. He realized that his life had changed completely, not because he had sought adventure, but because he had been open to it. That night, as the stars appeared over the mountains, John and Kaya sat outside by a small fire. The quiet was profound, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of an owl. Kaya turned to him and spoke softly. John, the cabin has brought us together, but it is more than just a home. It is a teacher, a guide, and a keeper of promises. You have learned patience, trust, and understanding. Now you know what it means to belong to the land, to the cabin, and to each other. John nodded, his heart full. He realized that her words were true. The cabin had not just given him a home, it had given him a connection, a purpose, and a bond that he could not have imagined. He looked at Kaya, understanding for the first time that their meeting was not chance. It was destiny. Days turned into weeks, and John felt fully part of the cabin and the surrounding land. He learned to listen to its subtle messages, to notice the small signs in nature, and to respect the traditions Kaya had shared. He realized that every moment, every sound, and every movement in the forest had meaning if he was willing to see it. One morning, as they walked along the ridge with the sun rising behind them, John felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had come to the cabin seeking peace and solitude, but he had found something far greater, a connection to history, a bond with Kaya, and a life full of meaning. The cheap cabin he had purchased on a whim had transformed into a place of wisdom, learning, and love. Kaya turned to him and smiled. You see, John, the cabin gives more than shelter. It gives understanding. It shows the path for those who are ready to learn, and you are ready. John smiled back, feeling a calm certainty he had never experienced before. He realized that his journey had been about more than a home. It had been about growth, connection, and destiny. The cabin, Kaya, and the land had shown him the importance of patience, observation, and trust. They had shown him what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. In the days that followed, John and Kaya continued to explore, repair, and care for the cabin. They discovered more hidden spaces, old journals, and artifacts that told the story of the people who had lived there before. Each discovery deepened their connection to the land and to each other. John began to feel that the cabin was not just a home, but a living part of their lives, a partner in their journey. One afternoon, as they sat by the fire, Kaya spoke about the future. The cabin will always guide us. We must respect it, care for it, and continue learning from it. Life here is not just about the present. It is about honoring the past and preparing for what comes next. John nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He realized that the cabin, the land, and Kaya had changed him completely. He was no longer the man who had arrived weeks ago, seeking only solitude. He was someone who understood connection, purpose, and the quiet power of life around him. As the sun set, casting golden light over the mountains, John and Kaya stood together on the porch. The cabin behind them seemed to glow warmly in the fading light, as if acknowledging their journey. John felt a sense of completion, yet he knew the story was far from over. There would always be mysteries to uncover, lessons to learn, and moments of wonder. But for the first time, he felt ready. He understood that he was part of something extraordinary, a story that had begun long before him and would continue long after. The cabin, Kaya, and the mountains were now intertwined with his life, shaping him, guiding him, and offering a connection that could not be broken. John took a deep breath, feeling the cool mountain air fill his lungs. He turned to Kaya and smiled. I understand now, he said softly. The cabin, the land, and you, it's all connected. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Kaya smiled back, her eyes reflecting the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. And you will continue to learn, John. Together we honor the past, live in the present, and shape the future. As night fell over the mountains, John felt a deep peace he had never known. The cabin, once a simple dream, had become a home, a teacher, and a guide. Kaya, who had appeared in the basement like a mystery at first, had become a partner, a friend, and a connection that transcended words. And the land, alive with history and energy, had welcomed him as part of its story. For the first time in his life, John felt complete. The cheap cabin he had purchased on a whim had changed his life forever. It had brought him Kaya, It had taught him lessons about patience, trust, and understanding, and it had shown him that life's most extraordinary gifts often come in the most unexpected ways. And as the stars shone brightly over the mountains, John knew that he had found not just a home, but a place where his heart, mind, and soul belonged. A place where he and Kaya could continue to learn, grow, and honor the mysteries of the cabin and the land they shared.